Beneath the surface of the ocean, past the last reach of sunlight, lies a world that has never once seen the light of day. Welcome to the Sleepy Lab. Tonight, you will drift down through the layers of the deep ocean, through the fading twilight, into the permanent dark where pressure builds and temperature falls and life continues, quietly, in ways we are only beginning to understand. If these journeys help you sleep, consider subscribing. One sleepy soul at a time. Now, let's begin. The ocean covers about 71% of Earth's surface. That is a number easy to say and difficult to truly hold. Most of what you picture when you think of the ocean, the sunlit shallows, the coral reefs, the waves catching light, that is only the thinnest skin of it. Beneath that skin lies almost everything. Sunlight, even on the clearest day, in the clearest water, can only reach about 200 meters down. Below that depth, it simply runs out. The water absorbs it, scatters it, takes it apart wavelength by wavelength. Red disappears first, within the first few meters, then orange, then yellow. By the time you reach 200 meters, only the faintest trace of blue remains, and then that too is gone. What lies below 200 meters is called the mesopelagic zone. It stretches down to 1,000 meters, and it is sometimes called the midnight zone, though that name belongs more properly to the deeper water still. It is, perhaps more accurately, the twilight, a place where the last ghost of light lingers before the true dark begins. Below 1,000 meters, the bathypelagic zone begins. No sunlight reaches here under any circumstances. Not a single photon from the surface. The darkness is total and permanent and has been so for as long as the ocean has existed. Together, these deep waters, everything below 200 meters, represent roughly 95% of the total living space on Earth. Let that settle for a moment. 95% of the space available to life on this planet lies in the deep ocean. And yet, it is the least explored, the least understood, the most remote place we know of. Less than 20% of the deep ocean floor has been mapped in any detail. We have better maps of the surface of the moon than we do of the bottom of our own ocean. The moon, 238,000 miles away, is in some ways better known to us than the water beneath our feet. There is something quietly humbling in that. As you descend through the water column, the world changes in ways that are difficult to imagine from the surface. Pressure increases by about 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of depth. At the surface, you live under 1 atmosphere of pressure. At 100 meters, 11. At 1,000 meters, the boundary of the midnight zone, the pressure is approximately 100 times what it is at the surface. 100 atmospheres. Every square centimeter of surface bearing the weight of 100 columns of air stacked to the sky. And yet life is there, adapted, patient, entirely at home. The average depth of the entire ocean is about 3,688 meters. That is the average. The floor is not flat. It rises and falls in mountain ranges and plains and trenches that dwarf anything on land. The deepest known point on Earth is called Challenger Deep, in the Mariana Trench, in the Western Pacific. It reaches nearly 11,000 meters below the surface. If you placed the tallest mountain on Earth at the bottom of Challenger Deep, its peak would still be more than 2 kilometers underwater. The scale of the deep ocean is not dramatic in the way that cliffs or storms are dramatic. It is quiet and vast and simply enormously there. Temperature falls as you descend. Near the surface, in warmer parts of the ocean, the water might be 20 degrees Celsius. Comfortable, almost. But as you pass through the mesopelagic zone, the temperature drops sharply. By the time you reach 1,000 meters, it has often fallen to around 4 degrees. This boundary, where warm surface water meets the cold deep, is called the thermocline. Below it, the temperature stabilizes. The deep ocean, for most of the year, in most of the world, hovers just above freezing, cold and still and dark and immense. It is not a hostile place, exactly. Hostile implies that something is working against you. The deep ocean is simply indifferent to the concerns of the surface. It has its own rules, its own rhythms, its own slow and ancient logic. There is a particular quality to this kind of darkness that is worth sitting with for a moment. It is not the darkness of a room with the lights off, where your eyes adjust and shapes begin to emerge. It is not the darkness of a cloudy night, where some ambient glow still finds its way through. It is the darkness of a place where light has never arrived and never will. In the deep ocean, below 1,000 meters, the only light that exists is the light that living things make themselves. And there is more of that light than you might expect. But that is a story for another night. For now, simply rest with the image of it. A world of cold and pressure and permanent dark, stretching across 95% of the living space on Earth, largely unmapped, largely unknown, full of creatures that have never seen the sun and have no need of it. The deep ocean has existed in roughly this form for hundreds of millions of years, long before the first land animal drew breath, long before the first forest, long before anything we would recognize as familiar. It was here then, as it is here now, cold, dark, patient, and alive. And somewhere beneath the surface of the ocean tonight, in water that has not seen light since before the age of the dinosaurs, something small and luminous is drifting slowly downward, unhurried, at home in the dark. That small, luminous thing drifting downward is not alone. Around it and below it, and stretching in every direction for thousands of kilometers, the water holds a kind of light, not sunlight, not anything borrowed from the surface, but light that living creatures have made for themselves, quietly in the cold. Before we follow that light deeper, it helps to understand what happens to sunlight as it descends. Even in the clearest ocean water, light does not travel far. Red wavelengths are absorbed within the first few meters. Orange follows not long after. Yellow fades, green dims, until only blue remains, pressing downward, growing thinner with every meter. By the time the water reaches 200 meters deep, even that blue is nearly gone. What remains between 200 and 1,000 meters is something between light and the absence of it. A faint, diffuse glow, arriving from above, too weak to see by, too weak to read by, too weak to cast a shadow, and yet it is there. This is why the mesopelagic zone is sometimes called the twilight zone, not because it is lit, exactly, but because it is not yet fully dark. That distinction matters enormously to the creatures living there. A faint glow from above tells an animal which way is up. It reveals the silhouette of something swimming overhead. It marks the boundary between the world of light and the world without it. And so the animals of the twilight zone have spent millions of years learning to read it. Many mesopelagic fish have eyes that are large out of all proportion to their bodies. Tubular eyes, pointing upward, built to gather every available photon from above. They are not looking at the world around them. They are looking at the ceiling of their world, watching for the shadow of something that might eat them, or something they might eat. One of the most quietly remarkable of these animals is the barrel-eye fish. It is a small creature, only a few centimeters long, but its head is encased in a transparent dome of fluid, a soft, clear bubble through which you can see directly into the skull. Inside that dome sit two tubular eyes, bright green, pointing upward. They can rotate. When the fish needs to look forward, the eyes swivel. When it needs to scan the dim ceiling above, they tilt back. The dome itself may protect those delicate eyes from the stinging tentacles of the jellyfish the barrel eye sometimes shelters beneath. It is a strange and gentle-looking animal, drifting in the near dark, its green eyes slowly turning. But the twilight zone presents a problem as well as an opportunity. If you can see silhouettes from below, then you yourself are a silhouette. Any predator beneath you, looking upward, will see your dark shape against the faint glow from above. Life, as it tends to do, found a solution. Some animals in the twilight zone produce their own light along their undersides, a soft, downward-facing glow, carefully tuned to match the faint illumination coming from above. From below, they become invisible, their shadow erased by their own light. This strategy is called counter-illumination, and it is one of the more elegant solutions the deep ocean has produced. The animal does not hide in darkness, it hides in light, its own light, calibrated to the world around it. Which brings us to the light itself. Roughly 3/4 of all deep-sea animals are estimated to produce bioluminescence in some form. 3/4. In a place where there is no sun, no moon, no surface to reflect from, the majority of living things carry their own illumination. The chemistry behind it is the same across almost every creature that uses it. A molecule called luciferin reacts with an enzyme called luciferase in the presence of oxygen. The reaction releases energy as light. Almost no heat is produced. It is sometimes called cold light, and the name fits. A quiet, efficient glow. Nothing wasted, nothing burned. What is perhaps most striking is how many times this chemistry has been independently discovered. Bioluminescence has evolved separately at least 40 times across the animal kingdom. 40 distinct lineages, on 40 separate occasions, arriving at the same solution. In fish and squid and jellyfish and worms and crustaceans and single-celled organisms, each finding, through its own path, that light is useful in the dark. It is one of those facts that sits quietly in the mind for a while before its full weight becomes clear. 40 times? In the deep ocean, that light serves many purposes. It is used for communication, flashes and patterns that carry meaning between members of the same species. It is used for camouflage, as we have seen. It is used to startle predators, a sudden burst of brightness in the dark that buys a moment of confusion and a chance to escape. And it is used to hunt. The anglerfish is perhaps the most familiar example. A deep-sea predator, compact and patient, with a jaw full of long, curved teeth and a remarkable piece of equipment mounted above its head. From a modified spine on its dorsal fin, a slender filament extends forward over the mouth. At the tip of that filament hangs a small glowing bulb, the esca. It pulses softly in the dark. To a small fish or crustacean navigating the blackness, it might look like a point of bioluminescence drifting freely. Something to investigate. Something, perhaps, to approach. The light in the esca is not produced by the anglerfish itself. It comes from symbiotic bacteria living inside the lure. Bacteria that glow continuously, sustained by the fish, doing the work of attraction while the fish simply waits. The anglerfish does not chase. It does not pursue. It holds still in the cold, in the dark, and lets the light do everything. There is something almost meditative about it. A creature that has reduced hunting to its quietest possible form. Patience, and a small light, and the willingness to wait. The deep ocean rewards patience. It has to. Food is scarce, distances are vast, and the cold slows everything down. The animals that live here have adapted not by becoming faster or stronger, but by becoming more efficient, more still, more attuned to the faint signals moving through the water around them. A flash of blue light in the distance, a shadow crossing the dim ceiling above, the slow pulse of a lure drifting in the current. These are the signals that matter here. These are the things worth paying attention to. And the animals of the twilight zone and the deep have built their entire existence around reading them. Eyes that gather the last traces of light, bodies that produce it, strategies refined over millions of years in a world where every photon is precious and every movement carries meaning. The darkness of the deep ocean is not a void. It is a medium, something that carries information, that shapes behavior, that has pressed life into forms we are only beginning to understand. And somewhere in that darkness, right now, a small green-eyed fish is drifting with its transparent dome, catching nothing, its eyes slowly rotating upward, watching the faint ceiling of its world, patient and quiet and entirely at home. Not far from where that small fish drifts, something else is waiting. A light hangs in the water. It pulses very slowly, a soft blue-white glow, no larger than a grain of rice. It moves in a gentle arc, as if caught in a current. But there is no current moving it. It is attached, suspended from a thin filament above a wide, dark mouth. This is the anglerfish's lure, the esca. And the light inside, it does not belong to the fish. Not exactly. The anglerfish cannot produce that glow on its own. Inside the esca, living within it, are bacteria, bioluminescent bacteria that the fish has cultivated, housed, and fed. In exchange, they produce the light that draws prey toward the waiting mouth below. It is a partnership struck in the dark between two organisms that could not survive this depth alone. The fish provides shelter, the bacteria provide the signal, and together, they become something a small, hungry animal might mistake for food. This kind of arrangement, life-sustaining life in the service of deception, is not unusual in the deep ocean. It is, in many ways, the rule. But not every light here is meant to be seen by everyone. Some of it is private. Certain dragonfish, long, dark, needle-toothed creatures that move through the mesopelagic like slow shadows, produce bioluminescence in a wavelength that most deep-sea animals cannot detect. Red light. In a world where nearly every eye has evolved to see blue and green, red is effectively invisible. It passes through the water, illuminates whatever it touches, and goes unnoticed by almost everything around it. Almost everything. The black dragonfish carries its own red searchlight beneath its eye, and unlike its neighbors, it can see that wavelength. Its photoreceptors have been tuned, over millions of years, to detect exactly the light it produces. So it moves through the dark with a beam that only it can read, illuminating prey that has no idea it is being watched, hunting in a spectrum of light that, to everything else in the water, does not exist. A private language, written in a color no one else can see. The deep ocean is full of these private arrangements, these quiet negotiations between form and function, between predator and prey, between organism and environment. And some of the most unusual of them belong to a creature that is difficult to place in any familiar category: the vampire squid. Its name suggests something fearsome, but the name is misleading in almost every way. It is not a squid. It is not an octopus. It occupies its own separate order within the cephalopods, a lineage that branched away from both squid and octopus long ago, and has been refining itself in the deep ever since. It is dark, almost black, with a cloak of webbing connecting its arms. And when threatened, it does something no squid or octopus does. It inverts. The webbed arms fold upward and over its body, turning inside out, covering it in a mantle studded with small, pale spines. What was a soft, open creature becomes a closed, spiny sphere, a shape that offers little purchase to anything that might want to bite it. Then, when the threat is past, it unfolds again, slowly, and returns to drifting. The vampire squid does not hunt. This is perhaps the most surprising thing about it. In a zone full of predators, fish with enormous teeth, creatures with bioluminescent lures, animals that can swallow prey larger than themselves, the vampire squid has chosen a different path entirely. It feeds on marine snow. Marine snow. The name is gentle, and the thing itself is gentle. It is the slow, continuous fall of matter from the sunlit world above. Dead plankton, shed mucus, tiny fragments of organic material, the fecal pellets of animals that fed near the surface and then released what they could not use, all of it drifting downward, particle by particle, in a rain so fine it is nearly invisible. A single particle may take weeks to reach the seafloor. Weeks of slow descent through cold, dark water, passing through the mesopelagic zone, through the bathypelagic below it, settling eventually onto the sediment far beneath. And as it falls, it carries with it a small piece of the sunlit world, carbon, fixed by photosynthesis at the surface, now moving downward into the permanent dark. The vampire squid collects this snow with long, sticky filaments. It extends into the water around it, gathering particles, compressing them into small packages, consuming them. It is a quiet way to live, unhurried, requiring almost no energy, perfectly suited to a world where food is scarce and movement is expensive. And the vampire squid is not alone in depending on this falling material. Marine snow is the foundation of most deep-sea life. For the majority of organisms below the sunlit zone, it is the primary source of nourishment. The deep ocean has no photosynthesis of its own, no plants, no algae producing energy from light. Almost everything that lives here depends, in some way, on what falls from above, on the slow, patient delivery of carbon from a world it will never see. Scientists have a name for this process: the biological pump. Surface waters absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Phytoplankton use it to build their bodies. Those bodies are eaten, and the carbon moves up through the food web. And then, when organisms die, or shed waste, or are consumed and their remains released, that carbon begins to sink, carried downward by marine snow, by the bodies of animals, by the daily migrations of creatures that feed at the surface and descend again before dawn. The deep ocean receives this carbon and holds it. Roughly 37,000 billion tons of dissolved carbon sit in the deep ocean right now, a number that is difficult to hold in the mind. Far more than the atmosphere contains, the deep ocean is, in this sense, one of the most important carbon stores on the planet, a vast, cold, slow repository for matter that once floated in the air above the sea. And the animals that move between these two worlds, the surface and the deep, are part of what makes this transfer possible. Among the most important of them are the lanternfish. Small, unremarkable at first glance. Most are between 2 and 15 centimeters long, covered in rows of small photophores that give them their name. There are over 250 known species of them, distributed across every ocean on Earth. And despite their modest size, they are, by total biomass, among the most abundant vertebrates on the planet. The sheer number of them is difficult to comprehend. They rise toward the surface each night in their billions, feeding on the plankton that bloom in the shallower water. And then, before the light returns, they descend again, back into the mesopelagic, back into the cold and the dark, carrying with them, in their bodies, the carbon they consumed above. When they are eaten in the deep, that carbon stays there. When they die and sink, that carbon stays there. They are, without knowing it, part of the slow machinery that moves matter between the sky and the seafloor. Tiny animals performing, in aggregate, one of the most consequential biological processes on Earth. And they do it every night, rising and falling with the rhythm of the light above them, a rhythm they cannot see directly, but that their bodies have learned to follow over millions of years. Up in the dark, and down again before dawn. This migration, this nightly rising and falling of billions of small bodies, is not unique to lanternfish. Other creatures join it. Copepods, small shrimp, bristly worms, and dozens of other mesopelagic animals all move in the same direction at the same time, up as darkness falls above, down as the first pale light begins to filter through the water at dawn. It is, as far as we know, the largest daily movement of animals on Earth. Not the migration of wildebeest across a plain, not the seasonal flight of birds across a continent, but this, a vertical tide of small bodies rising and sinking in the dark every single night, in every ocean simultaneously. The scale of it is hard to hold in the mind. And for a long time, it was invisible to us, known only as a strange anomaly in the data. When sonar technology was first used widely at sea, operators began noticing something unexpected: a layer in the water column that reflected sound back to the surface. It appeared on their screens as a solid mass, somewhere between 200 and 600 meters down. It looked, for all the world like a second seafloor. They called it the phantom bottom. It moved, rising toward the surface each evening, sinking again each morning. A false floor that breathed with the rhythm of the day. What they were seeing was the collective body of the migration itself. Billions of small animals, packed densely enough to scatter sonar waves back upward. Not rock, not sediment, but flesh. The living mass of the mesopelagic, made briefly visible by sound. It took years to understand what the phantom bottom actually was. And even now, the full extent of what moves within it remains uncertain. Among the animals that do not join the migration, that remain in the mesopelagic and the deeper water below it, are some of the least known vertebrates on Earth. The bristlemouth fish of the genus Cyclothone are, by some estimates, the most numerous vertebrate genus on the planet. More numerous than any bird, any rodent, any schooling fish near the surface, and yet almost no one has heard of them. They are small, rarely more than a few centimeters long, dark, with bodies that are nearly transparent in life. They drift in the mesopelagic and the upper bathypelagic, largely motionless, waiting. They have no need for speed or color or elaborate display. The deep ocean asks none of that of them. It asks only patience and economy and the ability to survive on very little for a very long time. Cyclothone are thought to be among the most abundant vertebrates alive today, and yet a single expedition might return with only a handful of specimens. They slip through nets. They dissolve in the pressure change of being brought to the surface. They leave almost no trace of themselves in the scientific record. They are everywhere and almost entirely unknown. And then there are the siphonophores. They are not easy to describe because they are not quite what we mean when we say animal. A siphonophore is a colony, a long chain of individual organisms, each one called a zooid, each one specialized for a single task. Some zooids are responsible for movement, pulsing like tiny bells to propel the colony through the water. Others are responsible for feeding, extending long tentacles to capture prey. Others handle reproduction. Others provide flotation. No single zooid is the animal. The colony is the animal. Or perhaps the colony is something else entirely, something that sits between individual and collective in a way our categories were not built to describe. Some deep-sea siphonophores reach lengths of 40 to 50 meters, longer than the largest blue whale, longer than most ships. A single organism, if we choose to call it that, stretching silently through the dark water. Its tentacles spread across a volume of ocean larger than a house. The Portuguese man-o'-war, which some people have encountered near the surface, is a siphonophore. But the deep-sea species are different in character. Slower, more deliberate, adapted to a world where energy is precious and movement is expensive. Some of them produce bioluminescence, not a single point of light, but a coordinated display that travels along the length of the colony, a wave of cold blue light moving from one end to the other, as if the entire animal is thinking in light. Whether this is communication between zooids or a lure for prey, or something else entirely, is not fully understood. The deep ocean keeps its explanations close. What is known is that the light works. Prey are drawn toward it, and the tentacles are waiting. Deeper still, and larger than almost anything else in the mesopelagic, are the giant squid. They are rarely seen alive. For most of human history, they were known only from fragments, a tentacle washed ashore, a beak recovered from the stomach of a sperm whale, circular scars pressed into whale skin by toothed suckers. Evidence of an animal that existed somewhere below the reach of light, in numbers unknown. A living giant squid was not photographed in its natural habitat until 2004. Video footage came only in 2012. For all the centuries of seafaring, all the nets and lines and instruments lowered into the ocean, the giant squid remained unseen. They can reach lengths of up to 13 meters. And their eyes are unlike anything else in the animal kingdom. Up to 27 centimeters in diameter, the largest eyes of any living animal. eyes that evolved not to see in sunlight, but to detect the faintest traces of bioluminescence in near total darkness. There is a theory about why those eyes grew so large. It is not simply to gather more light in general. A squid that size could have achieved reasonable vision with much smaller eyes. The leading hypothesis is that those enormous eyes evolved specifically to detect the bioluminescent flashes produced by sperm whales as they move through the water. A sperm whale descending into the mesopelagic disturbs the bioluminescent organisms around it. Its body, moving through water full of light-producing creatures, creates a faint, moving glow, and a giant squid with eyes large enough to detect that glow from a distance might have just enough warning to move away. The eye, as an early warning system, evolved in response to a predator that hunts by sound, in a world where the only light is the light that living things make themselves. Sperm whales dive to depths exceeding 1,000 meters in search of giant squid and their even heavier relative, the colossal squid. They hold their breath for over an hour. They navigate by echolocation, sending out clicks so powerful they are among the loudest sounds produced by any animal. And somewhere in that darkness, the squid waits, its vast eyes open, watching for the glow that means something enormous is coming. Two animals, shaped by millions of years of pursuit and evasion, meeting in a place where no light reaches from above, where the only witnesses are the small bioluminescent creatures disturbed by the struggle, briefly illuminated, and then dark again. Those struggles leave marks. Sperm whales that have been studied at the surface carry circular scars across their skin, pale rings pressed into the flesh, left by the toothed suckers of giant squid during encounters far below. Each scar is a record of something that happened in complete darkness, at crushing pressure, between two animals that almost no human has ever seen alive in that place. The whale surfaces. The squid does not. And the whale carries the memory of the meeting written on its body for the rest of its life. In the cold waters around Antarctica lives a relative of the giant squid that is, in some ways, even more formidable. The colossal squid is heavier than the giant squid, broader, more massive through the body. And where the giant squid has toothed suckers, the colossal squid has something different, rotating hooks on its tentacles. Small, curved, and sharp, able to swivel as they grip. A prey animal caught in those arms would find them very difficult to escape. The colossal squid is rarely encountered. What we know of it comes mostly from fragments found in the stomachs of sperm whales, and from the occasional specimen brought up in fishing nets. It lives its life largely beyond our reach, in water that is very cold and very deep, and very far from anywhere. The deep ocean is, above almost everything else, a place of scarcity. Food arrives slowly, unpredictably, from above. Marine snow drifts down in a thin, continuous fall. Occasionally something larger sinks, a dead fish, a fragment of a larger animal, and very occasionally something enormous arrives. But for most creatures in the deep, meals are rare, and the body adapts to rarity. Many deep-sea fish have mouths that seem, at first, almost absurd, enormous relative to the rest of the body, jaws that hinge open far wider than seems possible. This is not accident. In a place where food may not come for days or weeks, the ability to consume whatever arrives, regardless of size, is worth almost any anatomical cost. The gulper eel carries this to an extreme. Its jaw can open to an angle of nearly 180 degrees. The mouth becomes, essentially, a wide net, and its stomach can expand to hold a meal larger than the eel's own body. The gulper eel is not a fast or powerful predator. It drifts, it waits, and when something comes within reach, it opens and engulfs and closes. The meal may last it a very long time. Many deep-sea fish share a related adaptation. Their skeletons are loosely articulated, their bodies flexible in ways that surface fish are not. This looseness is not weakness, it is design. A rigid body cannot accommodate a meal twice its own size. A flexible one can. The fish eats, distends, and slowly digests over days or weeks, then waits again. Slowness is not a failure in the deep ocean. It is the dominant strategy. When food is scarce and cold slows every chemical reaction, a slow metabolism is not a disadvantage. It is a form of efficiency. The body burns less, requires less, can survive longer between meals. Growth slows to almost nothing, but so does the cost of living. Some deep-sea fish are thought to live for decades, growing so slowly that their age is difficult to determine. A fish that looks small and unremarkable may have been drifting in that same cold water for 30 or 40 years, accumulating, very gradually, the mass it needs to reproduce. And then there is the Greenland shark. The Greenland shark lives in cold, deep water. It has been found at depths of over 2,000 meters, though it also moves through shallower Arctic seas. It is a large animal, gray and slow-moving, with small eyes that are often clouded by a parasitic copepod that attaches to the cornea. It does not seem, at first glance, like a creature of extremes. But the Greenland shark may live for more than 400 years. This estimate comes from radiocarbon dating of proteins in the lens of the eye, tissue laid down at birth and never replaced. The oldest individuals studied were estimated to be somewhere between 272 and 512 years old. The midpoint of that range places them in the 1600s, swimming slowly through cold water while the world above the surface changed beyond recognition. And the Greenland shark does not reach sexual maturity until roughly 150 years of age. A century and a half of living before reproduction begins. By the time a Greenland shark first mates, the human life has already ended several times over. This is what extreme longevity looks like when it is shaped by cold and scarcity and depth. Not a dramatic extension of a fast life, but a life that was never fast to begin with, slow from the first moment and slow to the last. Pressure shapes the body in other ways too. Many deep-sea organisms have solved the problem of pressure not by building stronger structures, but by abandoning rigid structures almost entirely. A gelatinous body, soft, water-filled, with very little solid tissue, has almost nothing to compress. The pressure outside and the pressure inside are nearly equal. There is no air pocket to crush, no rigid cavity to collapse. The body simply yields, and in yielding, survives. This is why so many deep-sea creatures look, to our eyes, almost unfinished, translucent, soft, barely there. They are not fragile, they are adapted. Their softness is the adaptation. The snailfish is perhaps the clearest example, found at depths exceeding 8,000 meters, deeper than almost any other fish. It has a body that is soft and translucent, pale as milk glass, with no hard edges. It moves through water at pressures that would destroy most biological structures. And it does so without difficulty because its body offers almost nothing for the pressure to act against. The snailfish also has no swim bladder. Most fish use a swim bladder, a gas-filled internal organ, to control their buoyancy, rising or sinking by adjusting the amount of gas inside. But a gas-filled space at great depth would be crushed. The pressure at 8,000 meters is roughly 800 times that at the surface. No biological membrane could hold a gas pocket against that force. So the snailfish does not try. Many deep-sea fish have made the same choice, in different ways. Some replace the swim bladder with tissues filled with fat or oil, which compress far less than gas and can provide a degree of buoyancy without the risk of collapse. Others simply allow their watery, gelatinous flesh to be naturally close to neutral buoyancy in the surrounding water. The body becomes, in a sense, part of the ocean, dense enough to sink slowly, light enough not to sink fast, hovering in the dark without effort. This is the deep ocean's recurring answer to every extreme it presents. Not resistance, accommodation. The cold slows the body, and the body learns to need less warmth. The pressure would crush rigid structures, and the body learns to be soft. The food is scarce, and the body learns to wait. Each constraint, over millions of years, becomes a shape, a form, a creature that could not exist anywhere else and does not need to. The darkness that seems, from the surface, like an absence, is, from within, simply the world. And this accommodation goes deeper than shape. It goes all the way down to the smallest structures inside the cell, to the membrane itself, the thin, flexible boundary that separates living from not living. At the surface, a cell membrane is made partly of saturated fatty acids, which pack together in orderly rows. Under the cold and pressure of the deep ocean, those orderly rows would stiffen. They would lose their give. And a membrane that cannot flex is a membrane that cannot function. So deep-sea organisms build their membranes differently. They use a higher proportion of unsaturated fatty acids, molecules with a slight bend in their structure, a kink that prevents them from packing too tightly. This keeps the membrane fluid, responsive, alive in the way that living things need to be alive. It is a change invisible to any eye, a difference measured in molecular geometry. And yet, it is the difference between a cell that works and a cell that does not. The proteins inside those cells face their own version of the same problem. Pressure distorts the shape of proteins, and a protein's shape is everything. It is how an enzyme finds its target, how a receptor recognizes a signal, how the machinery of life fits together. Squeeze a protein out of its natural shape, and it stops working. It denatures, as scientists say, loses the form that gives it function. Deep-sea proteins have evolved structures that resist this distortion. Subtle differences in their folding, in the way their amino acid chains coil and brace against each other. Structures that would actually be unstable at the surface, where pressure is low. They are built for a world that would destroy the proteins of a surface fish. And then there is a molecule called trimethylamine oxide, TMAO. It is found in the tissues of deep-sea fish, and it does something quiet and remarkable. It stabilizes proteins against the distorting force of pressure, acts as a kind of molecular counterweight, holding the protein shape intact where pressure would otherwise pull it apart. What makes TMAO especially striking is how it is distributed. The deeper the fish lives, the more TMAO its tissues contain. The relationship is consistent enough that scientists can estimate a fish's typical depth simply by measuring the concentration of this compound in its flesh. A molecular pressure gauge written into the body itself. The deep ocean shapes its inhabitants at every scale, from the sweep of a fin to the bend of a fatty acid chain, from the architecture of a jaw to the folding of a single protein. And then, in 1977, something was found that changed not just our understanding of the deep ocean, but our understanding of life itself. A small submersible called Alvin descended near the Galapagos Rift in the eastern Pacific. It was carrying scientists who expected to find, as most of the deep ocean floor offers, cold sediment and quiet emptiness. What they found instead was heat, shimmering, mineral-rich water rising from cracks in the seafloor. And around those cracks, life. Dense, improbable, thriving life in a place where no sunlight had ever reached. Hydrothermal vents. They form where seawater seeps down through fissures in the ocean crust, sinking toward the heat of the magma below. The water is superheated, sometimes to temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Celsius, and then expelled back upward, carrying dissolved minerals from deep within the rock. At those temperatures, the water should flash instantly to steam, but it does not. The pressure at that depth is so immense that water remains liquid even far above its surface boiling point. The same force that shapes every living body down here also holds the water itself in a form it would otherwise abandon. The vents called black smokers release dark plumes of mineral-rich fluid that billow upward like chimneys. Towers of sulfide minerals build up around the openings, sometimes reaching several meters tall. They look, in the lights of a submersible, like something from a world that predates our own. And in a sense, they are. At the base of every vent community are bacteria, chemosynthetic bacteria, which do not use sunlight to make energy. They use chemistry. Specifically, they oxidize hydrogen sulfide, a compound toxic to most surface life, and extract from that reaction the energy they need to build organic matter. This is chemosynthesis, a mirror of photosynthesis, but powered not by light from above, but by heat and chemistry from below. Before 1977, it was assumed, quietly, almost without question, that all life on Earth ultimately depended on the sun, that every food web, however long and tangled, traced back to a plant or an algae capturing sunlight. The deep ocean was thought to survive only on what drifted down from the sunlit world above. The vents overturned that assumption entirely. Here was an ecosystem with its own foundation, its own primary producers, its own energy source, completely independent of the star 93 million miles away. Life did not need the sun. It needed chemistry, and heat, and water, and time. Around the vents, the chemosynthetic bacteria form thick mats on the rock, and feeding on those bacteria, or hosting them inside their own bodies, are animals unlike almost anything found elsewhere. Giant tube worms rise from the seafloor in clusters, their white tubes anchored to the rock, their crimson plumes extended into the warm, mineral-rich water. They can reach 2 meters in length, and they have no mouth, no stomach, no digestive system of any kind. They do not eat. Instead, inside their bodies, occupying most of their internal cavity, is an organ called the trophosome. It is packed with chemosynthetic bacteria. The worm provides the bacteria with hydrogen sulfide and oxygen, carried in its blood by a specialized hemoglobin. The bacteria convert those compounds into energy and organic molecules, and the worm lives on what the bacteria produce. Two organisms so thoroughly intertwined that neither could survive without the other, the boundary between them almost meaningless. And around the tube worms, the vent community extends outward in every direction. Mussels and clams cluster on the warm rock, their tissues also hosting chemosynthetic bacteria. Pale shrimp swarm in dense clouds near the vent openings. Crabs pick their way across the mineral towers. Small fish drift at the edges of the warm water, feeding on whatever they can find. All of it sustained without a single photon of sunlight. The vent is its own small sun, not radiating light, but radiating heat and chemistry, and from that radiation, an entire world assembles itself. It is dense with life in a way that almost nothing else in the deep ocean is, an oasis in the cold dark, burning quietly from below. And it is temporary. A single vent may remain active for only decades before the heat source beneath it shifts or cools. The community that built itself around that warmth will collapse within years of the vent going cold. The tube worms will die. The mussels will close and go still. The shrimp will disperse into the surrounding dark, searching. But the deep ocean is wide, and somewhere, along a ridge or a rift, new cracks are opening. New water is seeping down toward new heat. New plumes are beginning to rise. And life, which has been finding these places for hundreds of millions of years, will find them again. Not all oases in the deep ocean burn hot. There is another kind, quieter, cooler, and in some ways, even stranger. Cold seeps are places where methane and hydrogen sulfide seep slowly upward through cracks in the seafloor, not heated by magma, not driven by superheated water, just a slow, steady exhale of chemistry from somewhere deep within the rock. The water at a cold seep is barely warmer than the surrounding ocean, and yet life gathers there, just as it gathers at the vents, drawn not by heat, but by the chemistry itself. Chemosynthetic bacteria colonize the sediment around the seep. Mussels and clams settle in dense beds, their tissues threaded with microbial partners that do the work of turning sulfide into energy. Tube worms take hold. Crabs and fish arrive at the edges. The same logic as the vent, assembled from the same deep patience, but slower and far more enduring. A hydrothermal vent may last decades. a cold seep can persist for thousands of years. The community that forms around a seep has time to deepen, to layer, to become something intricate. Species that would never survive the brief, intense life of a vent can take root here, in the long, slow chemistry of a seep that has been exhaling for longer than most human civilizations have existed. And within the seeps themselves, there is something even more unusual. Methane hydrates. They look like ice, pale, solid, almost crystalline, but they are not quite ice. They are a lattice of water molecules, frozen into a cage-like structure, and inside each cage, a single molecule of methane, trapped, held, preserved by the cold and the pressure of the deep ocean floor. Step onto a methane hydrate deposit, and it would feel firm underfoot. It would look like a pale crust on the sediment. And if you brought a piece to the surface and held a flame to it, it would burn, the methane releasing from its frozen prison as the pressure dropped and the temperature rose. The seafloor holds vast reserves of this material. More carbon is locked inside methane hydrate deposits than in all the world's known coal, oil, and gas reserves combined. It is one of the largest carbon stores on the planet, sitting quietly in the cold dark, stable for now. And living inside it, inside the hydrate itself, are methane iceworms. Small, pale, and almost impossibly specialized. These worms burrow through the hydrate deposit as though it were soft sediment. They live in a habitat that exists nowhere else on Earth, a solid made of frozen gas and water on the floor of the deep ocean. What they eat, precisely, is still not fully understood, but they are there, moving slowly through their strange frozen world, as real and purposeful as any creature in the sunlit shallows above. The deep ocean keeps offering these reminders that life does not wait for comfortable conditions. It arrives, and it adapts, and eventually the conditions become home. And sometimes, home arrives from above. A whale dies. It may die at the surface, or somewhere in the water column, and for a time, its body drifts. But eventually, it sinks, slowly, turning in the dark water, descending through the mesopelagic zone, past the last traces of light, down through the cold and the pressure, until it comes to rest on the seafloor. This is called a whale fall. And what happens next unfolds over decades. The first to arrive come quickly. Hagfish, those ancient, boneless creatures, writhe through the soft tissue in great numbers. Sleeper sharks move in from the surrounding dark, slow and deliberate. Rat-tail fish circle at the edges. Together they strip the carcass, consuming the soft tissue, the muscle, the organs, the blubber, in a matter of months. It is not a gentle process, but it is efficient. Almost nothing is wasted. When the soft tissue is gone, the bones remain. And now a second community arrives. Polychaete worms colonize the exposed skeleton and the enriched sediment around it. Crustaceans pick through the remains. The seafloor around the carcass becomes a small, dense ecosystem, feeding on the nutrients that have soaked into the sediment from the decomposing body. This stage can last for years. And then the third stage begins. The one that connects a whale fall to a hydrothermal vent in ways that took scientists a long time to understand. Anaerobic bacteria move into the bones themselves. The bones of a large whale are rich in lipids, fats stored deep in the structure of the skeleton. The bacteria begin to decompose these lipids, and in doing so, they produce hydrogen sulfide. The same compound that fuels chemosynthetic life at vents and seeps begins to seep from the whale's own bones. And the chemosynthetic community responds. Bacteria colonize the bone surface, mussels arrive, and then, discovered only in 2002, the Osedax worms. They are small, and at first glance they look almost like flowers, a feathery plume extending from a tube anchored to the bone. But below the surface of the bone, the worm extends root-like structures that bore directly into the skeleton, secreting acid to dissolve the bone tissue and release the lipids within. Ozdax worms have no mouth, no stomach, no digestive system in any conventional sense. They absorb nutrients directly through their roots, the way a plant draws water from soil. They are animals that feed like plants, living inside the bones of the largest animals on Earth, on the floor of the deep ocean, in the dark. A single large whale carcass, a blue whale, a sperm whale, a fin whale, may support over 400 species of organisms across the full arc of its decomposition, from the first hagfish to arrive in the hours after the body settles, to the last Osidax worm drawing the final lipids from a bone that has been on the seafloor for 50 years. The whale continues to give. It is, in a sense, still alive, not as a whale, but as a place, a temporary island of energy and chemistry on an otherwise sparse seafloor. And these islands are not rare. Along productive ocean margins, scientists estimate that whale falls occur roughly every 5 to 10 kilometers. The deep seafloor, which can seem so empty from above, is dotted with these slow, decades-long blooms of life, each one at a different stage. Some fresh, some stripped to bone, some already deep in the sulfophilic stage, their bones furred with bacteria and threaded with worm roots. There is a thought that has stayed with some researchers who study these communities, that whale falls may have served as stepping stones across geological time, that the organisms adapted to vent and seep chemistry may have spread from one to another, island to island, across the deep ocean floor over millions of years. The whale, in death, may have helped carry life from one oasis to the next. The deep ocean does not waste anything. Every body that sinks becomes a gift. Every particle of marine snow, every whale, every creature that dies in the water column and drifts downward, all of it arrives eventually at the floor, and the floor receives it, and something is waiting. The darkness down here is not empty. It is patient. And beneath all of it, beneath the whale bones and the worm roots and the slow chemistry of sulfur and decay, there is the floor itself. The deep sea floor is covered in something called pelagic ooze, a fine, soft sediment made of the accumulated remains of countless tiny organisms, the shells of foraminifera, the silica skeletons of radiolarians, the slow drift of mineral particles from distant continents. It accumulates at a rate of about 1 centimeter per 1,000 years. 1 centimeter in 1,000 years. If you pressed your finger gently into that sediment, you might be touching material that settled there before the first human city was built. The floor is very flat here. The abyssal plain stretches for thousands of kilometers with almost no relief, no hills, no valleys worth naming, just a vast, soft, nearly featureless expanse. It is one of the flattest surfaces on Earth, flatter than any desert, flatter than any frozen lake, and it extends in every direction, further than the mind easily holds. Scattered across this plain, half buried in the ooze, are objects that look almost like stones, rounded, dark, roughly the size of a potato. They are called manganese nodules, mineral concretions that form around a tiny seed, a fragment of bone, a shark tooth, a grain of siddite, and grow outward, layer by layer, as dissolved metals precipitate slowly from the surrounding water. They grow at a rate of about 1 centimeter per million years. A single nodule sitting on the seafloor today may have been growing since before our species existed, since before the ice ages, since long before anything we would recognize as human walked on land. They lie there in their millions, across vast stretches of the abyssal plain, quietly accumulating, unhurried by any measure of time we use. And yet the plain is not empty. It can seem that way from a distance. The darkness, the cold, the near absence of food drifting down from above, all of it suggests a kind of barrenness. But the abyssal plain is inhabited. Sea cucumbers move slowly across the sediment surface, ingesting ooze and extracting what little nutrition it contains. In some regions, they make up the majority of all animal biomass on the seafloor, not in great density, but spread across such enormous distances that their total presence becomes significant. Brittle stars extend their delicate arms across the sediment, gathering particles. Sea spiders, pale, long-legged, almost ghostly, pick their way across the floor. Polychaete worms thread through the ooze below the surface, processing sediment in the dark. Some of the sea cucumbers here do something their shallow water relatives almost never do. They swim, not gracefully, not quickly, but they lift themselves from the sediment and undulate their bodies through the water, moving from one place to another in the dark. It is a strange thing to picture, an animal most people associate with tidal pools and rocky shores, drifting slowly through the absolute blackness of the abyssal plain, thousands of meters below the surface. And yet, there it is, life finding a way to move, even here. Below even the abyssal plain, the floor drops away into the hadal zone. The word comes from Hades, the underworld of ancient Greek thought, and the name is apt in its way. Though not because the hadal zone is hostile or infernal, it is simply deeper. The hadal zone refers to ocean trenches that descend below 6,000 meters, the deepest habitable environments on Earth, narrow, elongated scars in the seafloor where tectonic plates meet and one slides beneath the other. The Mariana Trench is the most famous of these, reaching nearly 11,000 meters at its deepest point. But there are others. The Tonga Trench, the Philippine Trench, the Kermadec, each one a world within a world, cut off from the surrounding abyssal plain by its own steep walls. The pressure in the hadal zone is almost beyond easy description. At 10,000 meters, the weight of the water above presses down at roughly 1,000 times the pressure at the surface. Every cubic centimeter of space is compressed by a force that would crush most structures humans have ever built. And yet, life is there. Amphipod crustaceans, small, shrimp-like animals, rarely more than a few centimeters long, are among the most abundant animals in hadal trenches. They gather in dense swarms around any food that sinks into the trench: a piece of wood, a dead fish, a fragment of organic matter drifting down from far above. They are extraordinarily well adapted to the pressure, to the cold, to the near total absence of light. In some trenches, they are the dominant animal, present in numbers that seem improbable given how remote and extreme the environment is. But something has reached them, even here. When scientists collected hadal amphipods and analyzed their tissues, they found something unexpected: persistent organic pollutants, PCBs and other industrial chemicals that were manufactured and used at the surface, banned in many countries decades ago, and yet somehow present in the bodies of animals living in the deepest places on Earth. The pollutants had entered the food web at the surface, bound themselves to organic particles, and sunk, slowly, over years and decades, settling into the trench, entering the sediment, entering the animals that fed there. The most remote habitat on the planet carries the chemical signature of the surface world. Plastic has been found there too, in the digestive tracts of animals collected from the deepest ocean trenches. Fragments of bags, fibers from synthetic textiles, particles too small to see with the naked eye. The trench, which collects everything that sinks, has collected this as well. It is a quiet and uncomfortable fact, not one that calls for alarm in this moment, but one worth holding gently, that the boundary between the human world and the deep ocean is more permeable than it appears. And then there is sound. The deep ocean is not silent. It never has been. Low-frequency sound travels through water with remarkable efficiency, roughly 4 times faster than through air, and the deep ocean carries sounds from enormous distances. The slow grinding of tectonic plates, the deep, resonant calls of fin whales, traveling across entire ocean basins through the Sofar Channel, the distant, low rumble of shipping traffic present now in every ocean on Earth. Earthquakes announce themselves in the deep water as long, rolling pressure waves that propagate for thousands of kilometers before fading. The deep ocean has always been full of these sounds, the geological and biological voices of the planet, moving through the dark water in frequencies too low for human ears to register without instruments. It is a kind of music, if music can be imagined without melody, a continuous, overlapping presence of vibration and pressure and wave. The darkness down here is not the absence of everything. It is the presence of something else entirely, something slower, older, and more patient than the sunlit world above. The sediment remembers 1,000 years in a single centimeter. The manganese nodules remember millions. The water carries sounds from the other side of the world, and somewhere in the trenches, in the deepest cold, small animals go about their lives in the dark, entirely indifferent to the distance between themselves and the surface. They have always lived here. This is simply where they are. And yet, even in that stillness, there is sound. The sperm whale moves through the dark water like a slow, enormous thought. It does not see its way through the deep. It listens. From somewhere deep in its enormous head, it produces a click, a single, sharp pulse of sound so intense that it registers at up to 230 decibels, the loudest sound produced by any animal on Earth. That click travels outward through the water, strikes something in the dark, a squid, a canyon wall, the sloping edge of a seamount, and returns. The whale reads the echo with its jaw, its body, its whole attentive being. It is navigating by sound alone, in water so dark that eyes are almost beside the point. Sound moves through water differently than it moves through air, roughly 4 times faster, and it carries much farther. A sound made in the deep ocean does not simply fade into silence the way a sound fades in open air. Under the right conditions, it can travel for thousands of kilometers, bending and channeling through the water column, losing almost nothing along the way. The reason for this lies in a particular layer of the ocean, sitting at around 1,000 meters depth. This is the SOFAR channel, the sound fixing and ranging channel, a band of water where temperature and pressure combine to create a kind of acoustic corridor. Sound entering this layer is bent back toward it from above and below, trapped, guided, carried forward with minimal loss. It is, in a sense, a natural telephone line running through the interior of the ocean. Fin whales have been using it for far longer than we have known it existed. Their calls, long, low pulses below the threshold of human hearing, enter the SOFAR channel and travel, not just across a bay or a stretch of coast, but across entire ocean basins. One whale calling in the North Atlantic may be heard by another whale thousands of kilometers away. The ocean, at depth, is not a place of silence. It is a place of very slow, very far-reaching conversation. Below all of this sound, below even the SOFAR channel, the water itself is moving, but moving in a way that has almost nothing to do with waves or tides or the wind at the surface. The deep ocean has its own circulation, vast, slow, driven not by wind, but by differences in temperature and salt. This is thermohaline circulation, thermo for heat, haline for salt. When seawater becomes very cold, it becomes denser. When it becomes saltier, it becomes denser still. Near Greenland, near Antarctica, at the cold margins of the world, surface water chills and sinks. It does not fall quickly. It descends in a slow, heavy pour, spreading out along the seafloor, beginning a journey that will take it through the deep basins of the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific. A journey measured not in days or years, but in centuries. A parcel of water that sinks in the North Atlantic today may not see the surface again for roughly 1,000 years. It will travel in the dark, at near freezing temperatures, carrying with it the chemical signature of the surface world it left behind, the oxygen it absorbed, the carbon it dissolved, the memory, in a sense, of the sky it once touched. And then, somewhere, slowly, it will rise again, upwelling toward the light, completing a circuit so large and so slow that it operates on a timescale closer to geology than to weather. This circulation is not merely a curiosity of oceanography. It is one of the reasons the planet remains livable. The deep ocean absorbs heat. More than 90% of the excess heat generated by the changes now occurring in the atmosphere has been taken up by the ocean. The surface would be far warmer without it. The deep water receives this heat quietly, without announcement and carries it downward and away. It is a kind of patience that has no equivalent on land. Not all of the deep water is equally hospitable to life. There are layers in the midwater column, particularly in the mesopelagic zone, where oxygen runs thin. These are the oxygen minimum zones, layers where biological activity is intense enough that the organisms living and dying and decomposing there consume oxygen faster than the slow circulation can replace it. The water in these zones can hold almost no dissolved oxygen at all. For most animals, this would be a barrier, a layer to avoid, to swim around, to pass through as quickly as possible. But some creatures have made it home. They have evolved metabolisms that function at oxygen concentrations so low that surface animals would suffocate within minutes. They move slowly, burn energy carefully, and occupy a niche that almost nothing else can tolerate. The deep ocean, again and again, turns what seems like a hostile condition into a kind of shelter. And through all of this, the oxygen minimum zones, the thermohaline currents, the SOFAR channel, the slow drift of marine snow, there are fish, enormous numbers of fish. The mesopelagic zone alone is estimated to hold somewhere between 1 and 10 billion tons of fish biomass. That range, 1 to 10 billion, is not a rounding error. It reflects how genuinely uncertain our knowledge is. We have sampled so little, mapped so little, seen so little, that the uncertainty spans an order of magnitude. We do not know, within a factor of 10, how many fish live in the most abundant fish habitat on Earth. What we do know is that these fish matter: the lanternfish, the bristlemouths, the hatchetfish, the countless small silver bodies rising and descending each day. They are consuming carbon at a rate that, as far as we can estimate, rivals the entire annual catch of the global fishing industry, not catching it for human use, but cycling it, transforming it, carrying it downward in their bodies when they die, locking it into the deep in ways that affect the chemistry of the whole ocean. They are not peripheral. They are central to processes that shape the planet's atmosphere and climate, and we have barely begun to understand them. The deep ocean is the least explored biome on Earth. That sentence is worth sitting with for a moment. Not the least explored region, the least explored biome, the largest living space on the planet, the habitat that covers the majority of Earth's surface and extends kilometers downward, and the majority of species living within it have never been described by science. They have no names, no place in any catalog. They exist, going about their lives in the dark, entirely unknown. Every expedition that descends into the deep returns with specimens that cannot be matched to anything in the scientific literature, creatures that have never been seen before, photographed before, named before. This happens not occasionally, but on virtually every dive. The deep ocean is not a place where discovery is rare. It is a place where the known is rare, and the unknown is simply the ordinary condition of things. The darkness down there is not empty. It never was. It is full of life that has been living quietly, without our knowledge, for longer than our species has existed. Patient, adapted, complete. And the water above it holds their sounds, their carbon, their slow migrations, carries the memory of the surface world downward and the chemistry of the deep world upward. Two realms in continuous, unhurried exchange. Every expedition that goes down comes back changed. Not just with specimens and data, but with the quiet understanding that the catalog of life on this planet is far larger than we thought, and that each descent into the dark reveals how little the descents before it actually found. The giant squid lived in human imagination for centuries before it was ever seen alive. Sailors described it. Whalers found its traces on the sperm whales. Scientists measured its beaked remains from the stomachs of animals that had hunted it in the dark. But the animal itself, living, moving through its own ocean, remained unseen. It was not until 2004 that a camera finally caught one. A research team working in the Pacific lowered a baited line into deep water and waited, and the image that came back showed something enormous and deliberate, reaching toward the bait with arms that moved with a kind of unhurried purpose. It had been there all along, living its life in the dark, entirely indifferent to the centuries of speculation above. 8 years later, in 2012, the first video footage of a living giant squid was captured in the deep ocean. Moving, breathing, real. It is worth sitting with that for a moment, that one of the largest animals on Earth, an animal with eyes the size of dinner plates, was not seen alive in its own habitat until 8 years ago. The deep ocean keeps its secrets not through any particular effort, simply through depth and pressure and dark. To reach those depths at all requires extraordinary machines. Research submersibles like Alvin, a vessel that has been diving since the 1960s, can carry 2 or 3 scientists down to depths of around 500 meters. They sit in a sphere of steel roughly 2 meters across, surrounded by water pressing in from every direction, and they look out through small viewports at a world that no sunlight has ever touched. The descent alone takes hours, slow and dark and very quiet. Remotely operated vehicles go further still, and without the weight of keeping people alive. These ROVs, tethered machines carrying cameras and lights and articulated arms, can be sent into places where no human body could survive. They move through the water on behalf of scientists sitting in warm rooms on ships above, watching screens, guiding the arms, collecting samples from a world they will never physically enter. It is a kind of remote witnessing, careful and patient, and always incomplete. Because for all of this effort, the submersibles, the ROVs, the decades of expeditions, the total area of deep sea floor that humans have explored in any real detail is smaller than the land area of the continental United States. The rest remains as it has always been, unmapped, unvisited, quietly alive. And in that darkness, light is everywhere, not the light of the sun, which stopped somewhere far above, but the light that living things make themselves, cold, brief, and blue. It flickers through the water in pulses and flashes, so frequently that the deep ocean does not feel dark in the way that a closed room feels dark. It feels more like a sky on a clear night, except that the stars are moving, drifting past each other, blinking on and off, responding to things we cannot see. Some of this light is triggered simply by touch. When a body moves through the water and disturbs the molecules around it, certain organisms respond by glowing. This is called mechanoluminescence, a light produced not by intention, but by contact, by the simple fact of something passing through. A fish swimming in the dark leaves a trail of brief blue fire behind it, marking its path for a moment before the water settles again and the dark returns. This same phenomenon is visible from the surface on certain warm nights. Dinoflagellates, microscopic single-celled organisms that drift near the surface of the ocean, produce a blue glow when the water around them is disturbed. A wave breaking on a beach, a hand trailing through the water from a boat, the bow of a ship cutting through a calm sea. All of it can trigger that cold blue light. It is the same chemistry, the same ancient reaction, carried all the way up from the deep into the shallows. A reminder that bioluminescence is not a curiosity of the abyss, but a property woven through the ocean at every depth. Down in the mesopelagic zone, the hatchetfish has built its entire body around the problem of light. Its shape is exactly what its name suggests, flat and blade-like, compressed into a thin profile when seen from the side. Along its belly, rows of light-producing organs called photophores are arranged with careful precision. They produce a faint downward glow that matches the dim light filtering from above, erasing the fish's shadow from the perspective of anything looking up from below. Its eyes are tubular, pointing upward. Not to the sides, not forward, upward. They are built to catch the faintest silhouette of something passing between the fish and the last traces of surface light. A shape, a movement, the brief interruption of a dim glow. That is enough. In a world where light is measured in fractions, the hatchetfish has learned to read those fractions with extraordinary precision. The stoplight loosejaw fish has solved a different problem. Most fish, when they open their mouths in water, create a small pressure wave, a disturbance that travels ahead of them and can alert prey before the mouth arrives. The loose jaw has no floor to its lower jaw. It is not a jaw in the usual sense, but a bare frame of bone and teeth, open to the water on all sides. When it opens its mouth, the water passes through rather than being pushed aside. No pressure wave, no warning, just the teeth, arriving in silence. It also produces red bioluminescence from organs near its eyes. Red light, at these depths, is effectively invisible to most creatures. It has been absorbed by the water long before it could reach here from the surface, and most deep-sea eyes have no receptors tuned to it. So the loose jaw moves through the dark, carrying its own private illumination, lighting up the water around it in a color that only it can see, hunting in a spectrum that its prey does not know exists. These are not strange exceptions. They are the ordinary solutions that life has arrived at, over millions of years, in a place where every advantage is measured in fractions of a second and fractions of a photon. The deep ocean does not reward excess. It rewards precision, economy, the quiet perfection of a body shaped exactly for its conditions. And those conditions, the pressure, the cold, the dark, the scarcity, have been stable for a very long time. Long enough for life to settle into them completely, to stop straining against them and simply become them. The darkness down there is not a problem that the animals are solving. It is the medium they were made in, the only world they have ever known. And it continues, right now, as it has for hundreds of millions of years. Unhurried, unlit, full of slow and patient life. There is a fish in the deep ocean, small enough to hold in one hand, that carries teeth too large for its own mouth. The fang-toothed fish is only about 16 centimeters long, smaller than most people's forearms, and yet its teeth are proportionally the largest of any fish known to science. They curve inward like pale hooks, and when the mouth closes, the lower fangs slide into sheaths beside the brain. There is nowhere else for them to go. The body simply accommodates them, as it accommodates everything down here, through quiet, unhurried adaptation. The viperfish carries a similar arrangement. Its teeth are so long they cannot fit inside a closed mouth at all. They protrude outward, curving slightly, visible even when the jaw is shut. In the dark, this would be invisible to anything that did not already know to look. And nothing down there is looking, not in the way we mean. These are not animals that chase, they drift. Most deep-sea predators are ambush hunters. They hold themselves still in the water column, expending almost nothing, waiting for the dark to deliver something to them. A slight movement nearby, a faint pressure wave, the brief flash of bioluminescence from a startled creature, and then, very quickly, the stillness ends. This is the rhythm of life in the deep ocean, long stretches of nothing, and then a meal that may not come again for weeks or months. The deep ocean is largely a feast or famine world. Food is not distributed evenly or reliably. Marine snow drifts down in slow, thin curtains, and the creatures that depend on it have learned, over millions of years, to hold what they receive. Some deep-sea fish store lipids in their tissues, dense reserves of fat that can sustain them through months of scarcity. Their metabolisms run low and slow, burning as little as possible, waiting. There is something almost meditative about it. A body in the dark, perfectly still, spending almost nothing, simply persisting. And the lures? The anglerfish is the most familiar example, but it is far from the only one. Certain deep-sea worms trail bioluminescent threads behind them as they move through the water, glowing filaments that drift and pulse in the current, resembling nothing so much as a small constellation falling slowly through the dark. Jellyfish, too, carry light, some trailing luminous tentacles that may attract as much as they sting. The logic is always the same. In a place where food is rare and movement is costly, it is better to make the food come to you, better to glow softly and wait, than to spend energy searching through the dark. And then there is the comb jelly. Nemiopsis moves through the water like a thought. It is small, transparent, shaped loosely like a plum, and along its body run rows of tiny beating cilia that catch what little light exists and scatter it into shifting iridescent colors. But it also makes its own light. Waves of bioluminescence travel along its body in slow pulses, blue-green and cold, moving from one end to the other and fading, then beginning again. It is one of the oldest body plans on Earth. Comb jellies as a lineage reach back hundreds of millions of years, and the form has changed very little in all that time. The same transparent body, the same beating rows of cilia, the same cold light moving in waves. Whatever the comb jelly is doing, it has been doing it since long before the first fish, long before the first vertebrate of any kind. There is a kind of patience in that, not the patience of waiting, but the patience of having already arrived at something that works and simply continuing. The deep ocean holds many things like this. Forms that found their shape early and kept it. Structures that solved a problem once and have not needed to solve it again. On the seafloor, in the quietest and coldest parts of the deep, there are sponges made of glass. Deep sea glass sponges build their skeletons from silica, the same mineral as sand, the same mineral as the glass in a window, drawn from the seawater around them and woven into fibers so fine and so precisely arranged that they can transmit light along their length the way a fiber optic cable does. Light enters at one end and travels through the structure, bending around curves, emerging somewhere else entirely. No one is entirely sure what purpose this serves. Perhaps it guides the faint bioluminescence of symbiotic organisms. Perhaps it is simply a consequence of the structure, a property that emerged without being selected for. The deep ocean contains many things whose purpose is not yet clear. What is clear is how long these sponges have been here. Some glass sponges are estimated to be over 10,000 years old. 10,000 years in the same place, on the same patch of seafloor, drawing silica from the water and adding it, slowly, to a skeleton that was already ancient when the first human cities were being built. They do not move. They do not hunt. They filter what the water brings them, and they grow, and they persist. 10,000 years is longer than most of what we call history, and these sponges were already old when that history began. Beside them, on the sediment, there are other things that blur the boundary between what we call an animal and what we call something else. Xenophyophores are single cells, a single cell with a single membrane containing not one nucleus but thousands, and growing, in some cases, to 20 centimeters across. They are the largest known single-celled organisms on Earth, and they live on the abyssal plain, on the deep sea floor, in the cold and the dark, accumulating sediment particles around themselves and building irregular, fragile structures that look almost like tiny reefs. A single cell, 20 centimeters wide, living on the floor of the deep ocean. It is the kind of fact that resists easy comprehension. We tend to think of cells as small, invisible, contained, the basic unit of something larger. But here, in the cold and the pressure and the dark, a single cell has grown large enough to see, large enough to hold, large enough to cast a shadow. Life in the deep ocean does not follow the rules we learned in shallower water. It follows its own rules, arrived at over vast stretches of time, in conditions that have remained largely unchanged for longer than most ecosystems have existed. The glass sponge filters and glows and persists for 10,000 years. The xenophyophore grows its single enormous cell in the sediment. The comb jelly pulses with ancient light. The fang-tooth drifts in the dark, perfectly still, its impossible teeth folded away, waiting. All of it quiet, all of it patient, all of it shaped by a darkness so complete and so enduring that it has become, for everything living within it, simply the nature of the world. And yet, within that single enormous cell, there is more complexity than the outer form suggests. The xenophyophore does not have one nucleus, the way most cells do. It has thousands of nuclei distributed through its branching, sediment-encrusted body, each one carrying the same genetic instructions. each one part of a single living thing. It is not clear, even now, exactly why. Perhaps it is a consequence of growing so large without dividing. Perhaps it is something else entirely. Some arrangement that made sense over the long course of evolution and has simply persisted. The deep ocean keeps many of its reasons to itself. And the xenophyophore is not alone in the sediment. Beneath it, beneath the seafloor itself, meters below the place where water meets mud, there are microbes, communities of them, living not in the water column, not on the surface of the sediment, but inside it, buried in the cold, compacted layers of ooze that have been accumulating for millions of years. These are among the strangest living things we know of. They have no light. They have almost no food. The chemical energy available to them is so faint, so dilute, that their entire existence is conducted at a pace that is almost impossible to hold in the mind. Some of them divide once every 1,000 years. Not once a day, the way bacteria near the surface might, not once a year, or once a decade. Once every 1,000 years, a single cell completes the process of becoming two. In the time it takes one of these microbes to divide, human civilizations have risen and collapsed. Languages have been born and forgotten. The surface of the earth has been reshaped by weather and war and the slow drift of ice. And somewhere in the sediment, a cell has been quietly, imperceptibly, preparing to divide. There is no word for a metabolism this slow. We use the word living because there is no better one. But what these microbes are doing barely resembles what we usually mean by it. They're more like a process than a presence, a chemical patience stretched across geological time. And there are vast numbers of them. The total biomass of microbes living within the deep seafloor sediment, all those slow, buried, ancient cells, may rival the biomass of all life on the surface of the earth combined. Every forest, every field, every ocean current teeming with plankton, matched, perhaps exceeded, by organisms that most people have never heard of, living in a layer of mud beneath the deepest water on the planet. The deep ocean does not announce this. It simply continues, far from the sediment plains, in the places where the seafloor cracks and the Earth's heat finds a way through. The hydrothermal vents burn on. Those towers of superheated water, those chimneys of black smoke rising through the cold. They seem permanent from a human perspective, ancient and fixed and enduring. But they are not. A single hydrothermal vent may be active for only a few decades before the heat source beneath it shifts, the magma moves or cools or finds another path, and the vent goes quiet. When that happens, the community built around it collapses quickly. The tube worms and the mussels and the shrimp and the crabs, all the dense, improbable life that gathered in that one warm place, begins to die. Within years, what was a thriving ecosystem becomes a cold, dark ruin on the seafloor. And so the organisms must move. Larvae drift upward into the water column and are carried by currents that flow along the deep ocean floor, sometimes for hundreds of kilometers, searching, in whatever sense a larva can search, for the chemical signatures of a new vent, the faint traces of hydrogen sulfide and warm water that mean another community has formed somewhere in the dark. Some of them find it. And in the finding, something else happens, something that takes much longer to see. Because the vents are isolated from one another, separated by vast stretches of cold, barren seafloor, the communities that form on each one are cut off. Generations pass in that isolation. Mutations accumulate, and over time, the creatures on one vent field become subtly, then significantly different from their relatives on another. Closely related species on different vent fields can be genetically distinct, shaped by the particular chemistry of their vent, the particular currents that brought their ancestors there, the particular pressures of their small, isolated world. The deep ocean, for all its apparent sameness, is a place of hidden diversity, each vent a small island, each island evolving on its own. Among the creatures that live closest to the heat, there are shrimp that have, in a sense, Given up on seeing, they are functionally blind, their eyes reduced or absent, the visual world having offered them nothing useful in the permanent dark of the vent field. But they have not lost all sensitivity to light. On their backs, they carry a structure that may detect the faint infrared glow that radiates from the superheated vent water. Not visible light, not the blue wavelengths that filter down from the surface, but heat light, the dim radiance of extreme temperature, perceived through the skin of the back rather than through any eye. It may help them navigate the gradient between scalding and merely hot. It may tell them how close they are to the vent without getting close enough to die. The line between sensing and seeing is not always clear in the deep ocean. Closer still to the vent chimneys, in the place where the temperature climbs toward its most extreme, there is a worm. The Pompeii worm lives in a tube attached directly to the chimney wall. Its head extends into the cooler water nearby, but its tail rests in temperatures that can reach 80 degrees Celsius. 80 degrees, the temperature of water that would scald a human hand in seconds. And yet the Pompeii worm persists there. Its back is covered in a fleece of bacteria, a dense, pale mat of microorganisms that clings to its surface and may act as insulation, buffering the worm from the worst of the heat. A living coat, a partnership between animal and microbe that allows both to occupy a place nothing else can reach. Even so, there is a limit. No animal, as far as we know, can survive in water above about 122 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, the proteins that make up living tissue begin to fall apart. DNA itself becomes unstable, the molecular architecture of life, however it has been reinforced and adapted, cannot hold. 122 degrees is, as far as we can tell, the edge. But life does not stop at the edge of what animals can do. In the water immediately surrounding the hottest vents, in temperatures that would destroy any worm or shrimp or fish, there are archaea, single-celled microorganisms, neither bacteria nor anything else we have a familiar name for, and some of them thrive above 120 degrees Celsius. Thrive, not merely survive. They grow and divide and carry out their chemistry in water that is nearly boiling under the immense pressure of the deep. They were not expected. When they were first discovered, they required a revision of what we thought life could be. Not a small revision, a fundamental one. The boundary of the possible had to be redrawn and redrawn again, as more of them were found. And they are still there now, in the dark beneath the dark, in the heat that nothing else can bear. Quietly going about the business of being alive. Their discovery did something quiet but profound to the way we understand life. It did not simply add a new creature to a list. It moved the boundary. And when a boundary moves that far, when life is found thriving in conditions that were supposed to be lethal, the mind naturally turns to a question that had always seemed too large to ask seriously. Where else? Not as a dramatic question, just as a quiet, logical one. If life can exist here, in the dark, under crushing pressure, in water nearly hot enough to dissolve metal, then the conditions we once thought necessary for life were never truly necessary at all. And that changes everything we thought we knew about where to look. For a long time, the search for life beyond Earth focused on places that resembled the surface of our own world. Warm temperatures, liquid water and sunlight, a sky. But the archaea near the vents do not need any of that. They need chemistry, heat, a gradient between one state and another. And those things exist in many places in the solar system. The early Earth, some scientists now believe, may have looked something like a hydrothermal vent field. 4 billion years ago, the oceans were hot and chemically turbulent. There was no oxygen in the atmosphere, no sunlight reaching the seafloor in any useful form. The water was rich with minerals and gases venting from below. It was, in many ways, a hostile place, and yet it was precisely in conditions like those that life, somehow, began. Some astrobiologists consider the hydrothermal vent the most plausible cradle for that beginning. not a warm pond in sunlight, as was once imagined, but a dark, pressurized, chemically rich environment at the bottom of a primordial sea, a place not unlike what exists today. In the deep ocean, right now, the chemistry that sustains tube worms and vent shrimp and heat-loving archaea may be a living echo of the chemistry that first produced something capable of copying itself, of persisting, of becoming, over billions of years, everything alive. That is not a certainty. It is a hypothesis, carefully considered and still debated, but it is taken seriously by serious people, and that alone is worth sitting with for a moment. And then there is Europa. Europa is one of Jupiter's moons, a world roughly the size of our own moon, but covered entirely in ice. Beneath that ice, as far as we can tell, lies a global ocean of liquid water. Kept liquid not by sunlight, Jupiter is far too distant for that, but by the gravitational flexing of the moon itself, which generates heat from within. The ocean beneath Europa's ice is estimated to contain roughly twice as much liquid water as all of Earth's oceans combined. Twice as much. And there is evidence, still being gathered and debated, that the seafloor of Europa may be geologically active, that there may be hydrothermal vents down there, in the dark beneath kilometers of ice, in an ocean that has never seen the sun. If that is true, and it may be, then Europa has everything the deep ocean of Earth has: liquid water, chemical energy, heat gradients, pressure, darkness, everything. That is, except the life we know of. Enceladus, a moon of Saturn, tells a similar story. It is smaller, but it vents water vapor and ice particles from cracks near its south pole, material that appears to come from a subsurface ocean. That water contains organic molecules and silica particles that suggest hydrothermal activity on the seafloor below. The deep ocean of Earth may be the closest thing we have to a window into those worlds. Not a perfect window, nothing is, but an analog. A place where we can watch life do what life might do in the dark, under pressure, without sunlight, sustained by chemistry alone. Every expedition that returns from the deep ocean with a new species, a new behavior, a new biochemical adaptation, is also, in a quiet way, expanding what we think might be possible on a moon we have never visited. And so the Midnight Ocean is not only a place on this planet, it is a kind of map. A map of what life can be, drawn in darkness, over hundreds of millions of years. Because the deep ocean is old, older than most things we can point to and name. The conditions down there, the cold, the pressure, the dark, have remained roughly stable for far longer than any forest, any reef, any grassland on the surface. Terrestrial ecosystems are young by comparison. They have been remade by ice ages, by asteroid impacts, by the slow drift of continents. But the deep ocean has persisted, quietly, continuously. And the life within it carries that age. Some fish families in the deep have changed very little in tens of millions of years, not because they stopped evolving, but because the environment that shaped them has not changed enough to demand it. They found a form that worked, in a world that stayed the same, and they kept it. There is a fish called the coelacanth. For most of the 20th century, it was known only from fossils. The last of those fossils dated to roughly 65 million years ago, and so it was listed among the extinct, a creature of the ancient world, gone with the dinosaurs. Then, in 1938, a museum curator in South Africa noticed something unusual in the catch of a local fishing trawler. A large, strange fish, unlike anything she recognized. It was a coelacanth, alive, caught in deep water off the South African coast. The scientific world was, quietly, astonished. A fish that had been absent from the fossil record for 65 million years was still here, still swimming, still going about its life in the deep water, entirely indifferent to the fact that it had been declared extinct. Nearly 60 years later, in 1997, a second species was found, this time in the waters near Sulawesi, In Indonesia, a different ocean, a different population, the same ancient form. The coelacanth did not survive by hiding. It survived because the deep ocean gave it somewhere stable to be, a place where the pressures of change were slow enough that an ancient body plan could persist across geological time. And it may not be alone in that. The deep ocean is so vast, and so little of it has been seen, that the possibility of other ancient lineages living undiscovered in its depths is not a fantasy. It is simply an acknowledgement of how much remains unknown. Which brings us back to the dark itself. The midnight ocean is darker than any night sky. On the surface of the earth, even on the darkest night, there is light, starlight, moonlight, the faint glow of the atmosphere scattering photons that have traveled across the universe. There is always something. But in the deep ocean, there is nothing of that kind. No stars, no moon, no reflected light from any source above. The darkness is total, and it has been total for as long as the ocean has been deep. The only light that exists down there is the light that living things make themselves. Cold light, blue, mostly brief. A flash from a fish, a pulse along the body of a siphonophore, a slow glow from a cloud of disturbed plankton, light that lasts a fraction of a second and then is gone. For most of the animals on Earth, and by number, by biomass, by sheer count of individuals, most animals on Earth live in the deep ocean. This is the only light there is, not sunlight filtered through water, not the glow of a sky, just the cold blue spark of another living thing, close enough to see. That is the primary visual experience of most life on this planet. A brief light in the dark, made by something alive, seen by something alive, and then gone. And somewhere in that dark, right now, there are animals we have never seen. Not fossils, not traces. Living animals, moving through cold water, doing what they have always done, and we have no name for them. The total number of species in the deep ocean is not known. Estimates range from 500,000 to over 10 million. That gap, 500,000 to 10 million, is not a small uncertainty. It is a measure of how little we have seen. Every expedition that descends into the deep returns with specimens that cannot be matched to anything in the scientific record. Creatures collected in nets or caught on camera that belong to no known genus, no known family, sometimes no known order. They are placed carefully in jars, labeled with coordinates and depth, and carried back to the surface, where they wait, sometimes for years, for someone to describe them. This happens on virtually every voyage. Not occasionally, virtually every time. The deep ocean is the least explored biome on Earth. The total area of deep seafloor examined in any detail by human eyes is smaller than the landmass of a single large country. The rest, thousands of kilometers of abyssal plain, ridge, trench, and slope, remains unseen. It is possible, and some scientists consider it likely, that species we believe to be extinct are still living there. Not in the fossil record only, but alive, moving through water too deep and too dark for us to have found them yet. The coelacanth was thought gone for 65 million years, a fish from the age of dinosaurs, known only from stone. And then, in 1938, one was pulled from the water off the coast of South Africa, alive, unchanged, as if time had simply not reached it. A second species was found decades later, in different waters entirely. Both had been there all along. The deep ocean keeps things. It is cold enough, and dark enough, and undisturbed enough, that ancient lineages persist there long after they have vanished from shallower water. Some fish families in the deep have changed very little in tens of millions of years. The pressure and the cold and the dark are, in their way, a kind of preservation, a stillness that allows old forms to continue. And so the darkness is not empty. It only appears that way from above. From the surface, looking down, the deep ocean seems like an absence, a void beneath the waves, lightless and still. But that is a failure of perspective. The darkness is full of slow movement, quiet purpose, bodies adapted over millions of years to live exactly here. Sea cucumbers drifting across sediment that has been accumulating for longer than our species has existed. Glass sponges, some of them 10,000 years old, filtering water through skeletons made of silica. Single-celled organisms the size of a human hand, sprawling across the seafloor in shapes that have no equivalent anywhere else on Earth. Microbes buried meters deep in sediment, dividing once every 1,000 years, metabolizing so slowly that the word alive barely seems to apply, and yet it does. All of this in the dark, and connecting it to the world above, slowly, continuously, without pause, a rain of matter. Every particle of marine snow that drifts downward carries something of the sunlit world into the permanent dark. A fragment of a diatom that lived near the surface last week, a fecal pellet from a copepod that fed on a bloom of algae, a shed mucus net, a dead larva, a flake of organic material too small to see, each one sinking at its own pace, taking days or weeks to reach the floor. And as it sinks, it is intercepted, eaten, broken apart, transformed by the creatures of the mesopelagic zone, and then by those below, and then by whatever waits on the sediment at the bottom. Nothing is wasted. The surface and the deep are not separate worlds. They are one system, connected by this slow downward movement of matter. Carbon fixed by a phytoplankton cell in sunlit water on a Tuesday afternoon may spend 1,000 years in the deep ocean before it surfaces again. The deep stores it, holds it, breathes it back out on a timescale that dwarfs anything we can easily picture. The two worlds never meet directly. A fish from the midnight zone cannot survive at the surface. A sunlit creature cannot survive the pressure below. And yet, they are bound together through this quiet, continuous exchange. A bond made not of contact, but of drift. And the creatures of the deep do not experience any of this as hardship. The pressure that would kill us in seconds is simply the weight of the world to them. Their proteins are shaped for it. Their cell membranes are tuned to it. The cold that would stop a human heart is the temperature their enzymes expect. The darkness that would disorient us completely is the only condition they have ever known. They do not miss the light. They were never shaped by it. They were shaped by this, by the cold and the pressure and the dark and the slow drift of particles from above, by millions of years of scarcity and stillness and the occasional blue flash of a living thing nearby. The midnight zone did not ask them to adapt to hardship. It simply was what it was, and over time, life became what it needed to become. Something entirely its own. Not a diminished version of surface life, surviving in difficult conditions. Something else. Something that belongs here the way a deep root belongs in dark soil. Quietly, completely, without needing the sun. The darkness is not a problem to be solved. It is home. And right now, while you lie still in the dark of your own room, while your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to soften at the edges, somewhere far below the surface of the ocean, in water that has not seen light in millions of years, a lanternfish is rising toward the surface, its rows of photophores glowing faintly against the black. A particle of marine snow is drifting past a glass sponge that was already old when the first humans walked the earth. A creature with no name in any language is moving slowly through cold water, doing what it has always done. Unhurried, unaware of being unknown. Simply alive, in the dark, as it has always been. As the deep has always been. Quiet and full